I've had a ton of requests for the full history of Not a Surf, so here we are. The band early in their career would be predicted by rock station K-Rock in Los Angeles to follow in the alternative footsteps of Weezer. I mean, they got tons of comparisons to Weezer early in their career because of the success of their breakout hit Popular. They worked with the same producer that worked with Weezer on the Blue album, and their frontman sometimes wore glasses like Rivers Cuomo. But the success of Popular wouldn't result in a ton of album sales for the group. It also created a nationwide controversy, and the band soon lost the recording contract and faded into obscurity. On top of that, Not a Surf would be labeled as a one-hit wonder and told to pack it in by their own manager. But they didn't, and the story of the band is one of coming back even stronger and doing it on your own terms. Today, let's talk about the history of the band Not a Surf. Not a Surf's history begins with frontman and guitarist Matthew Cause, who would be born to university professors, and he would travel a lot as a kid. He lived in Paris for a short while with his parents, who were on sabbatical, and he learned French starting at the age of 5. They also spent a fair bit of time in Britain, where his father grew up in a cult called the Plymouth Brethren. It was a staunch sect of Christianity that was against modern culture, and his father eventually left the religion at the age of 16, getting a scholarship to Yale. Ka's father would end up not really seeing his parents after leaving the cult, as it's one of those things where you're excommunicated once you leave. And the history of Ka's family would actually be captured on the band's 5th record on the track Ice on the Wing. Kaz would be heavily influenced by his older sister, who was a radio DJ, and she had a pretty big record collection. Kaz would end up moving back to New York in the early 80s, where he was part of a band called The Cost of Living, which included future Not a Surf bandmate bassist Daniel Lorca. According to Spin Magazine, both Lorca and Kaz actually met in a Manhattan prep school in the earlier part of the decade and even attended Columbia together. The band, despite playing CBGBs and having a video played on MTV, as well as being featured on the front cover of a magazine called Now What, would break up in 1990. Lorca and Kaz would go on to form a new band called Because, and that band also soon split up. It was by the early 90s both Kaz and Lorca had long given up hope that they'd make it as musicians. The frontman from Because was really trying to network and get their band's name out there, but he got nowhere, and the experience really made both of the musicians pretty jaded. It was in 1992 they'd form a new musical project called Not a Surf, and Kaz would tell the Tampa Tribune about the name. It's a metaphor for dealing with depression, for dealing with the deep hole that's in all of us. Just being able to skim or surf over the top of that. It's about facing your hang-ups, not necessarily getting rid of them, but just to face up to them. It was in 1993 Kaz and Lorca started recording some new demos, and rehearsal spaces were pretty expensive in New York, so it forced the band to play really fast, and that was something that would influence them later on in their career. It was around this time Lorca was visiting Spain, and he took 30 copies of that demo tape that eventually found its way to a Spanish label who wanted to sign the band. The problem was that the band's drummer had quit 1 week after the demos were completed, and that's when they met drummer Ira Elliott, who had played in a band called the Fuzz Tones and was a roadie for the group Smithereens. By the time he got the call to join the duo, he was actually on the verge of quitting music, feeling pretty jaded. Kaz and Lorca remembered seeing him with the Fuzz Tones in 1984, and once he heard what was called the Spanish demo, he reconsidered telling the state newspaper, "When Matthew played me the Spanish recordings, I knew I would have been foolish to pass." It was sometime in the mid-90s, Kaz was on the subway in New York, and sitting directly across from him was producer Mitch Easter, who was reading the Daily News. Kaz had the demo tape in his pocket, but he couldn't muster up the courage to go introduce himself and hand him the tape. Meanwhile, a few weeks later, he met Rick Ocasek of the Cars, and he was actually a producer at the time too, at a New York club called the Knitting Factory. Being a huge Cars fan and a fan of his production work, Kaz, not wanting to repeat the same mistake he did in the subway a few weeks prior, introduced him to Ocasek and handed him the tape. Kaz would tell the Asbury Press, "I gave him a tape and I was all apologetic about bothering him while he was out, but he was very courteous about it. He asked if my phone number was on it. He called me 3 weeks later." Ocasek would urge Kaz to put the tape out, but said if he ever planned on re-recording it, he'd like to be the producer. The only problem was Not a Surf didn't have a label deal yet. the band soon got the attention of Electra Records. Not a Surf was playing a show in New York at a place called Rebar when a guy named Bobby McCain walked up to the band after one of their shows and asked for their tape. McCain was working at a label called Number 6 Records, and the next day Cause got a call from McCain telling him that his day job was actually at Electra, and he had played the demo tape for a friend who played it for his boss, and the band was soon asked to come into Electra's offices. They would soon nab a recording deal with the label. Cause at the time was the editor at Guitar World magazine and quit his job upon signing the contract, and he had also previously worked as an investment analyst at a bank. Ocasek was brought in to produce the group's first album, 1996's High Low. I want to point out that Ocasek at this point had worked with Weezer on their debut album. The band would end up re-recording their demo tape in just 19 days. The group's first record would focus on teen angst, and while the songs on the album were quite old, Cause would admit to the Santa Cruz Sentinel they were substantially better than the original versions. He would reveal to the state newspaper what the theme of the first album was, stating, "One of the things I'm interested in is how we as people trip ourselves up. We know there's a certain way to live, a way to achieve the right karma and all that, but we end up eating donuts and lying under the covers." The first single released from the group's debut album would be the track Popular that made the band, well, popular for a short period of time. The song was said to have been loosely inspired by either a 1950s or 1960s teenage etiquette book that Cause found while thrifting one day. One article claimed it was called The Teenage Guide to Popularity, while another claimed it was called Penny's Guide to Teenage Charm and Popularity. However, Cause would tell the New York Daily News the more ridiculous lines in the song he made up himself, plus he didn't want to get sued for reading the book verbatim. The song was just an exercise that Cause was doing one day, and it wasn't even supposed to appear on the album. He thought the contents of the book was ridiculous, and the song is really written as being tongue-in-cheek. But he also realized that a lot of people think this way. Cause would tell the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, "So I wrote the chorus from the most ridiculous point of view, from the point of view of someone who believes all their own hype." By Cause's own admission, it blew up faster than anyone in the band or the label imagined. It soon became a buzz clip on MTV, and by the summer of 1996, it was the most requested track on the network. The band didn't even know Popular was a hit yet. They would give an interview to Tulsa World where they recalled how they were opening one day for a band named Magnapop in Omaha, Nebraska. They were playing a club and saw a bunch of girls standing outside the venue's window pointing and giggling at the members. Once the girls were let in, the band members let them know that they weren't Magnapop, and one of the girls instead asked for drummer Ira Elliott's autograph. It turned out the girls knew who they were because MTV just added Popular to their buzz bin. It would happen on the band's first submission to the network. Cause would tell the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, "Sometimes a kid will write in and complain that popular kids in school are really into that song, and obviously popularity isn't intrinsically a bad thing, but I think the song is aimed at people who use their popularity as an exclusionary tool. The kind of popularity where you're saying, oh, we're cool and everyone else is a loser." He would go on to admit that some people would likely misinterpret the song, with him admitting at the band's shows that he'd meet a few kids who thought that popularity was the most important thing in life. Now, the song wasn't without controversy as well. The video, more specifically the last scene, sees two male students staring at each other in the shower. And it turned out the principal of the school where the video was shot, which was Bayonne High School in New Jersey, raised a stink about the last scene of the music video. He would refer to it as, and I quote, homoerotic. The principal also felt it misrepresented the school, but the members of Not a Surf shrugged it off, admitting that that wasn't even on their minds when they were making the video. The school's principal claimed he was also misled about the content of the video when he agreed to let Electra film on the school's premises. The main protagonists were in fact actors, but the background people were real students at the school. Cause would tell the New York Daily News, "The video is just so hetero, we thought that having a homoerotic bonus would give some balance." It turned out the school campus had actually seen other videos filmed there as well, including a Mariah Carey video and a television series featuring Montel Williams. The school, however, apparently had a rule that doesn't allow any school uniforms or logos to be displayed in music videos or shoots, but apparently one staff member who was unfamiliar with the rule gave out school uniforms to the cast members. X-Ray Productions, the company who made the music video, would in fact be banned from shooting future videos on the school premises. However, in return for allowing the band to film the video on school campus, the cheerleading and school football teams each received a $1,000 donation to purchase uniforms and equipment. Despite the song's astounding success, there was also a big problem. Since Popular came out prior to their debut record, much of the hype around the band didn't translate into record sales, as once the song's popularity died down, the public moved on to new music, and the group's debut record only ended up selling about 200,000 copies. Not a Surf would also get a ton of comparisons to Weezer, since Rick Ocasek produced the Blue album and Popular sounded a bit like the Sweater song, and the track also got comparisons to the group King Missile. Not a Surf, however, pushed back against these comparisons, claiming Popular was an anomaly on their debut record and wasn't really indicative of the band's sound. The band's bio sheet would claim they were, and I quote, a dead-on blast of power punk, but the members, by their own admission, saw themselves kind of like an art rock act, but at the same time, they didn't think an art rock band would get so far in their career. Not a Surf didn't want to be defined or pigeonholed by just one song, with Cause telling the Santa Cruz Sentinel, "Seeing us live will give people a completely different impression than our single. We're way faster." Cause would tell the Tampa Bay Tribune about the band's sound. "When people ask me, I say post-punk. Bunnymen, Joy Division, Pixies, post-punk is what I'm all about. As a band, we say we are a loud rock band with arty pretensions." The band also wanted to push back against touring with any major acts, citing Oasis as an example of a cheesy arena rock band. I also want to point out that Cause actually interviewed Noel Gallagher when he was working for Guitar World magazine. As the band focused their attention on their second album, they soon started to butt heads with their label, who wanted another song in the same vein as Popular. Cause would recall the conversations he had with the label that went along the lines of, and I quote, "We don't just need a song that could do well, we need miracles. Something ironic with a massive, easy to sing chorus that preferably talks about sex or high school or both." But there was also another factor to consider. As the band started to work on their second record, the type of commercial alternative rock that Not a Surf was associated with just wasn't popular anymore, and labels were adjusting and also panicking. Their A&R guy was also panicking because he didn't think the band had any potential singles on their second album, 1998's The Proximity Effect. Electra had tested the album, and in market research groups, it didn't test very well, so the label opted to only release it in Europe. Despite being named one of the 50 best albums by Mojo magazine for the year and landing on the covers of music mags in France and Germany, the band soon lost their recording contract. Not a Surf tried to get the rights to their second album from the label, but initially Electra wanted $75,000 to $200,000 for the record. After a prolonged battle, the label finally relented and gave it up, and the album would finally see a North American release in the year 2000. It would sell about 6,000 copies, and the band seemed like their 15 minutes of fame had expired. But then they discovered something when they hit the road. Cause would tell Spin Magazine, "The moment we put out The Proximity Effect, I bought a van and we went on tour, and more people showed up than our third high-low tour of the States, where we were on a bus and supposedly well-supported financially." Following the band's dismissal from Electra, they were soon at a crossroads. Cause 35 reflected on the success of Popular, telling the New York Times, "We kind of look at it as a golden ball and chain." Ben Weber, the band's manager, would add, "Usually when you start off that quickly, it's tough to continue the uphill trajectory. Most artists' careers tend to slide after that. That's why you've got these whole groupings of one-hit wonders. That becomes a real frustration to the artist, and most of them pack it in and go away." And that's what almost happened to Not a Surf. The members paid their rent for the time being with royalties that came in from Popular, and they tried to nab a new recording contract, but labels wanted another song just like Popular. Cause, for the time being, would get a job at a record store in Brooklyn called Earwax, and he soon found a cheap apartment in the same neighborhood as well. His days would consist of working at the store, going to see shows at night, and writing new songs, and this went on for about 2 years. Lorca, meanwhile, went to his job working as a web designer, while Elliott worked as a session drummer for bands around New York City. The trio would still get together intermittently to play covers of Iggy Pop and Pixies, and they would also appear in the movie Roommates, playing a fictionalized band. Fun fact you guys may not know was that the movie was written and directed by Rick Ocasek's wife, Paulina Porskova. The band would make the decision to self-finance their third record, doing a tour of America with Cause telling New York Magazine, we told people at our shows, buy our t-shirts and you will get a new album sooner. We paid our producer in wrinkled 1s and 5s. In the years since their hit song Popular, the band were once again slumming it, sleeping in recording studios to avoid paying for hotel rooms, and working day jobs to afford food and rent. Cause would tell the New York Times, it felt more like a first record again. There was a lot of time and we had to do it by ourselves. Not a Surf would send their third record to their manager at the time, who basically told them to pack it in, and that they were one-hit wonders in his eyes. Of course, they parted ways. The band got a new manager who got the band on the rosters of 3 different regional record labels. The band would end up signing with Barsuk, a Seattle record label, which also featured Death Cab for Cutie on their roster. The band's Seattle label apparently hadn't even heard the song Popular until 2003, and their European label didn't even know the song. The band would release their third record in 2003, titled Let Go, and is considered by many to be Not a Surf's high watermark. For a short period of time, the band even stopped performing Popular in concert, with Cause telling New York Times, I've met a lot of people who said I never liked you guys because of that song, but someone played me Let Go and I'm really won over. Cause would tell the Toronto Star that people started to come to their shows because of the whole album and not just because of Popular. He would remark, in the last couple of years, it finally feels like we got the audience we always wanted. But there's also this kind of impression that we were mainstream and went to the underground and found ourselves. But we were always here. The band would owe their second wave of success to Europe, where bassist Daniel Lorca lived at the time, and a growing audience in America as well. They would return in 2005 with another critically acclaimed album, The Wait is a Gift, with the album tackling the themes of deception, greed, love, joy, as well as regret. Cause would, however, have to pause the recording of the album for almost half a year due to writer's block and depression. In 2005, he would look back at the band's nearly decade-long run, telling Spin Magazine, one of the things I'm happiest about is that I really feel like we've had 2 careers. You either have the slow climb or you have the peak and fall. We always wanted the slow climb, but we weren't allowed to have it because we got thrown up into the peak and there was nowhere to go but crashing down. By the later part of the decade, the band also got some high-profile placements with their music, appearing on the programs 6 Feet Under and The OC. In 2007, the band was asked to contribute a song for the John Cusack film Martian Child, a fitting task given that Cause had recently become a father at the time. The group would return with their 5th record in 2008, and it would be hailed as one of the band's most diverse and mature-sounding records of their career. Some of the songs on the album even dated back to almost a decade or more, as Cause forced himself to go through nearly 30-some cassette tapes, revisiting old musical ideas, something he'd avoided doing on the last 2 albums. Appropriately titled Lucky, given what the band had to endure during their career, the album's pragmatic lyrics paint what we all know: life is difficult. Not a Surf would return in 2010 with a covers album called If I Had Hi-Fi. The album's title, funny enough, is a palindrome, so it reads the same way if you read it backwards. The band would return in 2012 with new material with The Stars Are Indifferent to Astronomy. The band would release 2 more albums in 2016 and 2020 with You Know Who You Are and Never Not Together. You Know Who You Are would see the band write a few tracks with Dan Wilson of the group Semisonic, whose song you might know, Closing Time. Cause would reflect on the 10 years since Popular came out, telling New York Magazine, I still like it, I'm just glad it's not our My Sharona. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. As always, if you have suggestions for future topics, use the link in the description box below, and I'll see you again in Rock Culture Stories sticker.